Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today we are taking a sledgehammer to one of the most protected, most romanticized, and really most fundamental institutions in human history.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at the architecture of intimacy itself.
Usually when we say architecture or systems on this show, you, the listener, might be thinking about, I don't know, the Federal Reserve, or maybe urban planning, or even the prison industrial complex.
Right, the big, obvious systems.
Exactly. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a text that claims the most rigid, most powerful economic architecture in our lives is actually the one inside our own homes. We are analyzing the essay Marriage and Love, written by the anarchist thinker Emma Goldman way back in 1911.
And it is a firebrand of a text. I mean, it is short, it's sharp, and it's just incredibly dense with systemic analysis. The central question here is, on the surface, pretty simple, but the implications are, well, they're radical, Goldman is asking. How does marriage function not as a romantic endeavor, but as a mechanism of the state?
A mechanism of the state.
Yes. She frames it as a legal economic institution, one that's designed for specific outputs, which, she argues, are very rarely the ones we think they are.
Which is such a heavy pivot right out of the gate. Because if you stop someone on the street today, or frankly in 1911, and you ask them, what is marriage? They don't say economic mechanism.
No, of course not.
They say love, they say soulmates, they say commitment. They'll tell you it's the ultimate expression of two people engaging in this, private emotional bond.
Precisely. And Goldman identifies that exact conflation, the mixing up of those two concepts, as the primary error in our perception. She argues that marriage and love are not just different. She argues they are enemies, antagonistic forces.
Enemies, wow.
Yeah. She suggests there's this massive structural tension between marriage, which she sees as a mechanism for security, for property, for social control, and love, which she defines as a totally uncoerced, chaotic, voluntary human connection.
Okay, so just to level set for everyone listening right at the top here, we are not here to give relationship advice. We aren't marriage counselors.
Definitely not, no.
And we are not here to moralize about whether you should or shouldn't get married. That is not the point of this project.
No, not at all. Our goal, and the goal of this show, is to look at patterns. We want to see the machinery behind the curtain. We're analyzing the incentives, the inputs, and the outputs of the system that Goldman describes. We want to understand why she believes this institution is, in her words, failing the people it claims to protect, and how those structures might still be echoing today.
And to do that, we absolutely have to look at the context. Because context is everything in systems analysis. Emma Goldman wasn't just, writing this on a blog in 2024. She was writing this in 1911. So who was she, and what was the world she was shouting at?
Emma Goldman was a force of nature, truly. She was a political agitator, a public speaker, an anarchist, a feminist, though she often clashed with the mainstream suffragettes of her time.
Why was that?
She thought they weren't going far enough. She saw the vote as just one small piece of a much larger system of oppression. She wanted to dismantle the whole thing, not just get a seat at the table.
Okay, so she was a radical thinker.
Through and through. And you have to imagine the setting she's in. Industrial capitalism is hitting its absolute peak. The state is expanding its authority into every corner of life. And, crucially for this text, the roles for women are rigidly, legally, and economically constrained.
Right. Let's really paint that picture. Women in 1911 are not CEOs. They are not senators. In most places, they still don't even have the vote. Their economic survival it's precarious.
Precarious is putting it very lightly. For the overwhelming majority of women, economic survival depended entirely on her relationship to a man, either her father or her husband. There was no social safety net to speak of. There were very few independent career paths that paid a living wage.
And that economic reality, that's the absolute foundation for Goldman's thesis, isn't it?
It is. It's the soil from which the entire argument grows.
Mm-hmm.
She argues that because of this economic precarity, marriage operates essentially as an insurance pact.
An insurance pact. That is such a cold, clinical metaphor for something we associate with vows and flowers and, white dresses.
It is, but she means it literally. She really wants you to compare marriage to a life insurance policy. Think about how insurance actually works. It is a binding financial agreement. You pay a premium in dollars and cents to secure a payout in the event of some disaster.
Okay.
So Goldman asks the listener to look at the ledger, to do the accounting. What is the premium a woman pays when she signs the marriage contract?
And in the text, she's absolutely brutal about this. She says the woman pays with her name, which she gives up. She pays with her privacy, her self-respect, and essentially her entire life. She reads the phrase, until death doth part, not as a romantic promise of endurance,
No.
but as a sentencing guideline.
Exactly, a life sentence.
Yeah.
She argues that the returns on this so-called investment are insultingly small compared to the cost. The woman is purchasing economic safety, food, shelter, social standing, but the currency she is forced to use is her very identity. She ceases to be an individual and becomes a role. A wife, a mother.
It's a transaction, a very, very expensive one.
It is a state-recognized contract regulating sexuality, property, and the legitimacy of children. That is the system's design. And Goldman's core point is that you cannot have a transaction that is fundamentally based on security and simultaneously claim it is based on love.
Why not? I think that's the part most people would struggle with. Can't you have both? Can't you have a business partnership that is also, deeply romantic?
Goldman's answer is a hard no, because the incentives are, in her view, antagonistic. Love, for her, requires freedom to exist. It has to be chosen every day without coercion.
And a contract.
A contract relies on compulsion. It's an enforcement mechanism. The moment you sign a piece of paper enforced by the state that says you will love someone forever, you have removed the very element of choice that, for Goldman, makes love real.
She quotes Dante's motto over the Inferno here, which is
God.
just so dramatic.
It is. Ye who enter here leave all hope behind. But she's using that drama to make a point. She's implying that once you sign that contract, the you that existed before ceases to be the priority. You become a function of the institution. You enter the machinery.
And like any machine or any contract, there have to be incentives for both sides to sign on.
Correct. The exchange is brutally simple. Economic security is swapped for compliance with gendered roles. The woman gets a home and sustenance. The man gets a housekeeper, a breeder for his heirs, and a certain kind of social legitimacy.
But she doesn't let men off the hook entirely, does she? It would be so easy to read this as a simple men are the oppressors, women are the victims narrative, but her systems analysis is a bit more nuanced than that. She sees men as being caught in the gears, too.
She does. And that's a crucial part of the analysis. She notes that men pay their own toll in what she calls economic chains. Now, the man's sphere is wider. He can vote, he can own property, he can move through the world with a freedom a woman couldn't dream of, but he's economically fettered by the institution.
He becomes the beast of burden.
He must provide. He must sustain the household. That is his role in the pact. He has to work a job he might hate for decades because he has a family to support. So his freedom is also constrained, just in a different way. But Goldman is clear that the constraint on the woman is total. It is internal and external. It shapes her entire being.
Okay, so let's look at the effectiveness of this design. If the purpose of the system, the sales pitch, is security and stability, that's why the state and the church promote it, right? Does the system actually deliver on that promise? Does it work?
Well, according to Goldman, the data proves the system is failing catastrophically. And remember, she's looking at statistics from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. She points out that 1 in every 12 marriages ends in divorce.
Which, I have to say, by modern standards, that sounds incredibly low. Today, it's closer to 40 or 50%, depending on the country and the demographic.
It sounds low to us, absolutely. But in 1911, that was a full-blown crisis. That was a societal panic. It was seen as a sign of total moral collapse.
A sign the institution was crumbling.
Exactly. And she digs deeper. She notes that divorces increased from 28 to 73 per 100,000 people in just a few decades. She cites statistics showing adultery increasing over 270%, desertion husbands just leaving their families increasing almost 370%.
So people were fleeing the institution in huge numbers, or, in the case of adultery, they were breaking the rules of the contract while trying to stay inside it to keep the insurance benefits.
Precisely. They were finding loopholes, creating workarounds just to survive the rigidity of the contract they'd signed.
And usually when we hear stats like that, even today, the immediate narrative is one of moral decay. You hear pundits say, people are selfish, or we've lost our family values, or the youth don't know how to commit anymore.
Right. It's always framed as a character flaw of the participants. You didn't try hard enough. You gave up too easily.
Goldman flips that completely on its head.
She takes a systems view, which is why this text is so perfect for our show. She says these aren't millions of individual moral failings. These are data points, and they indicate a system that is fundamentally hostile to human nature.
That's such a key reframe.
It is. She says, if you build a machine and it explodes 10% of the time or the operators keep trying to run away from it, you don't blame the operator. You blame the engineer. You blame the design.
That changes the question from what is wrong with these people to what is wrong with this contract.
Precisely. If the institution was truly aligned with human needs and desires, you wouldn't need an army of laws and priests to force people to stay in it, and you wouldn't see such high rates of desertion and misery.
Okay, but if the machine is broken, or at least deeply miserable for so many, why do people keep getting into it? How does the system ensure it has a steady supply of new participants? Because if I tried to sell you an insurance policy today that cost you your freedom and had a shockingly high failure rate, you wouldn't buy it.
You'd laugh in my face.
Right. So what's different here?
The difference is that you have been trained to buy it since the day you were born. You've been told it's the only option you have. And that brings us to the system inputs. How do you manufacture compliance? How do you prepare the actor, in this case primarily the young woman, to willingly, even eagerly accept this deal?
Goldman is just absolutely brutal here. She uses this metaphor of a fattened beast.
Like the mute beast fattened for slaughter.
That is such a visceral, horrifying image. She says that girls are drilled from infancy, that marriage is the ultimate goal. That is the finish line of a woman's life. If you don't cross it, you have failed at being a human being.
And to ensure they reach that finish line, the system relies on what we might call a conspiracy of silence. This is one of the most fascinating parts of her psychological analysis of the system. She argues that the education of young women is actually an education in ignorance.
She talks about the criminal ignorance of sex.
This is so crucial for the 1911 context, but the mechanism itself is timeless. The young girl is trained for marriage, meaning she is taught how to cook, how to clean, how to be a pleasing wife and mother, but she is kept in absolute, total ignorance of the physical, biological reality of what that means.
Goldman says it's considered indecent for a respectable girl of that era to know anything about marital relations.
Which creates a massive structural contradiction.
Yeah.
Just think about that for a second. You are preparing someone for a job, a lifelong job, but you're forbidding them from knowing what the daily duties of that job actually entail until after they've already signed the legally binding permanent contract.
It's like hiring a surgeon, but not letting them see a human body until they're scrubbed in for the first operation.
Exactly. It's insane from a design perspective.
Right.
And the inevitable outcome of that design is the shock of the wedding night.
Goldman describes it as entering a lifelong relation based on total ignorance, which then leads to repulsion and outrage, not connection or intimacy. She argues that a huge percentage of the unhappiness, the misery, the physical suffering in matrimony comes directly from this cultivated virtue of ignorance. It poisons the intimacy before it even has a chance to begin.
It creates a trauma bond instead of a romantic bond for so many.
And it all stems from that Madonna whore complex, weaponized at a societal level.
It's the good woman versus the bad woman dichotomy. This is a core control mechanism. To remain good, which really just means marketable in the marriage exchange, a woman has to deny her own nature. She must stunt her intellectual vision. She must be pure. If she knows too much or has too much experience, she loses her value as a commodity.
That is a harsh way to put it, but in the purely economic model of 1911 that she's describing, it's accurate. She is an asset being transferred from her father's household to her husband's.
And on the flip side, let's look at the men. What is the definition of a good husband in this system? Does the system demand that he be kind, or emotionally intelligent, or a good listener?
No. Goldman writes, and this is a direct quote, that he can have an empty brain as long as he has plenty of money.
A safe income. That's the primary qualification.
Ouch, that is deeply cynical.
But it's the pure logic of the insurance pact. If you are buying insurance, you don't care if the insurance agent is funny or smart or soulful. You care if the company's bank account is solvent.
Right.
If the primary driver of the transaction is economic survival, then character becomes a secondary luxury.
And a nice
To have. You can't eat character. You can't pay rent with it.
So we have a system where girls are socialized to be ignorant and dependent, and men are valued almost strictly for their earning potential. But why? Why is that economic pressure so incredibly strong? Why couldn't a woman just go out and work?
Now we have to look at the economic incentives and the labor market constraints. We have to look at what the alternative to marriage actually was in 1911.
Goldman does mention there were about 6 million women wage workers at the time, so women were working. It wasn't completely impossible.
They were. But Goldman offers a sharp critique of the psychology of that labor. She argues that because of the deep socialization we just discussed, most women view work as a temporary waiting room for marriage.
It's a stopgap. It's not a career.
Exactly. It's something you do between your father's house and your husband's house. And because it's viewed as temporary, it creates a devastating feedback loop. It becomes much harder to organize women into unions. It's harder to get them to fight for better wages or better conditions if they believe they're just about to escape the factory anyway.
You're just passing through until your real life begins. I don't need to fight for a pension because I'm going to get married next year. My husband will be my pension.
Right. But then Goldman delivers the reality check.
Yeah.
She says the home is not an escape. She calls it a prison with more solid bars than any factory. Because at least in the factory, you have other workers. You have some camaraderie. In the home, the isolation can be total and absolute.
And this leads into her use of the word parasite. Now, I want to be really careful here because calling women parasites sounds like a massive insult. It sounds like she's blaming the victim.
It does. It sounds incredibly harsh to the modern ear, and we have to unpack it. She is using it as a biological and economic descriptor, not as a moral judgment on a person's character. She is describing a state of economic uselessness that is created by the system.
So it's an output, not an input.
Precisely. In her view, the institution of marriage, as it was structured, condemns women to lifelong dependency. They are not independent economic actors. They survive off the labor of another person.
So when she says parasitism, she means structurally dependent, an organism that feeds off another organism to survive because the environment has removed its ability to feed itself.
Yes, that's the frame. She's diagnosing the condition that the system produces.
And she breaks this down by class, too, which I think is really important because the experience of this dependency wasn't the same for every woman.
No, it was vastly different. For the working class woman, marriage often just meant drudgery plus working for poverty wages. She notes that about 10% of New York City's industrial workers were married women. So they get the absolute worst of both worlds, the brutal factory shift during the day and then the full domestic shift at night. They are just, in a word, exhausted.
And for the middle-class woman, the woman who doesn't have to work in the factory, the one who supposedly has it all.
This is where her psychological analysis gets really sharp. She describes the middle-class wife who has no outlet for her energy or her intellect. She is barred from professional life. She is barred from public life. Her world shrinks to the four walls of her home. So where does all that human energy go?
She says the wife moves in the husband's sphere. Goldman uses words like nag, petty, and quarrelsome.
She implies the wife becomes a micromanager of her husband and her children because she has nothing else to manage. Her entire world is this tiny domestic kingdom, and so she obsesses over it.
And the tragic irony is that the husband is then driven from the house by the very boredom and narrowness that the system he benefits from has created in his wife.
It's a tragedy of design, a perfect self-reinforcing cycle of misery. The structure renders the woman intellectually and socially isolated, cutting her off from the world, and then her husband resents her for being uninteresting and small-minded. The structure creates the behavior that then destroys the relationship.
So if the system is miserable for the woman who becomes a dependent, and it's miserable for the man who is economically chained and bored, the ultimate defense we always hear is, but it's for the children. That's the trump card. We do all this to protect the next generation.
This is the myth of protection. And Goldman attacks this narrative aggressively. She completely refuses to accept the premise.
She does not hold back. She points to the thousands of destitute children, the overcrowded orphan asylums of her time as Exhibit A.
Her argument is simple and devastating. If marriage protects children, why are so many children suffering? She points out the flawed logic of the state when it comes to fathers. If a father commits a crime or if he can't support his family, what does the law do? It punishes him. It puts him in prison. But does the law then feed his child?
No.
Not at all. She says the labor of the convict goes to the state, not to the family. So the protection is an illusion. The state protects its own interests. It does not fundamentally protect the child. And as for the protection of the woman,
She makes this comparison to capitalism here that really creates a light bulb moment. It clarifies the whole model.
yes, it's a fantastic analogy. She says that just as capitalism keeps the working class in poverty and dependence and then offers charity to keep them from starving, marriage keeps women in ignorance and dependence and then offers them protection.
It's a snare.
It's a total snare. You are only being protected from a vulnerability that the system itself created in the first place.
That is such a powerful insight. It's like you break someone's leg and then you offer them a crutch and demand they be grateful to you for the crutch.
Precisely. If women had genuine economic independence, They wouldn't need the protection of the marriage contract. They could be free agents, choosing partners based on love and affinity, not economic necessity.
So this begs the big question. Who benefits? If the participants are so often miserable, why do the state and the church push this specific model so hard? Why are the laws so rigid? Why not just let people do what they want?
Goldman identifies the motivations very clearly. It boils down to what she calls the race argument.
The demand for more children.
The king, the president, the priest, the capitalist, they all demand output. They need a steady supply of bodies. They need soldiers for the armies. They need workers for the factories. They need more consumers. Goldman argues that the ultimate systemic goal is the production and control of human beings.
It sounds like a factory production line.
To her, that's exactly what it is. And marriage is the most efficient method to ensure that production continues predictably.
Specifically, it's the safety valve to prevent women from having autonomy over their own reproduction. She calls it indiscriminate breeding. The system requires quantity, not quality.
Which brings us to the alternative. Because Goldman isn't just tearing down the walls, she is trying to point towards a door. She isn't a nihilist, she's romantic in her own very specific anarchist way. She talks about love and freedom.
This is where the text really shifts tone. It moves from being purely analytical to being almost lyrical. She defines love in direct, stark opposition to marriage.
She describes love as this chaotic, powerful, untamable force of nature. She says it defies all laws and conventions.
The key element is freedom. She argues that love cannot be bought, it cannot be commanded. Even all the armies of the world cannot force it into existence. It must be voluntary to be real.
There's that beautiful line she uses, love creates warmth in a hovel, marriage can leave a palace desolate.
It's the difference between something organic that grows and something synthetic that confines.
And she radically reframes the idea of motherhood here too. She champions what she calls free motherhood. Now, we have to pause and realize just how scandalous this was in 1911. Suggesting that a woman should have a child without a husband was social suicide. It was seen as monstrous.
A truly dangerous idea.
But her argument is fascinating. She claims that children born in freedom, that is, outside of legal wedlock, actually receive better care than those born of compulsion within it.
And she rejects the social label of bastard.
She calls it a crown of thorns that society places on the child. Her argument is all about quality over quantity. The awakened woman, as she calls her, desires fewer children but better children. Children reared in genuine love, not what she calls a race of sickly, feeble human beings born simply because the law and the church said you had to reproduce.
She uses some literary examples to really drive this point home. She mentions the playwright Ibsen a lot.
Henrik Ibsen was a huge influence on anarchists and feminists of that era. His plays were scandalous for their time. She points to the character of Nora from A Doll's House.
Right, the famous ending where the woman walks out on her husband and children.
And Goldman highlights why Nora leaves. It's not just that she's tired of her responsibilities. It's the sudden, terrifying realization that she has lived with a stranger for 8 years.
Because the insurance pact doesn't require you to actually know the other person. It just requires you both to play your assigned roles. You can be married to someone for a decade and never actually meet the real person because you're both just wearing the masks the system gave you.
The institution creates a wall between you. And she also mentions Mrs. Alving from Ibsen's play Ghosts. She's the ideal mother who conforms her whole life and eventually realizes she has to break her chains to regain her own personality. These characters are case studies in system awareness. They are people waking up inside the machine and trying to step out.
Okay, so let's do what we do best here. Let's map this entire system. We've talked about all the different parts, but let's put it all on the whiteboard, so to speak. If we were trying to visualize this crisis in perception, who are the main actors in the system Goldman is describing?
Okay, let's synthesize this. The key actors are the state, which creates and enforces the laws, the church or religious institutions, which provide the moral narrative. Then you have husbands, wives, and employers.
And what are the incentives driving each of those actors?
For women, the primary incentive is economic survival and social legitimacy. You get married so you don't starve, and so you aren't a social outcast. It's a defensive move.
And for men and the state, what are they getting out of it?
For men, the incentive is domestic service, social status, and legitimate heirs to pass on property and name. For the state, the incentive is massive: the control of reproduction and the stability of the workforce and the army. A man with a family to feed is a compliant worker.
That's a huge point. He's less likely to go on strike or cause trouble because the stakes, his family's survival, are too high.
Exactly. The stability of the home directly reinforces the stability of the factory and the state. It's all connected. The domestic sphere isn't separate from the economic sphere. In this model, it's the foundation of it.
And what are the narratives used to maintain all this? This is like the software that runs on this system's hardware.
The narratives are powerful. Romantic destiny, true love, respectability, duty, the sanctity of the home. These are the beautiful stories we tell ourselves to cover up the brutal economic machinery underneath.
And the feedback loop. How does the system sustain itself?
It's a perfect vicious circle. It starts with restricted labor access for women. Because women can't earn a real living wage, they must rely on marriage for survival. Because they rely on marriage, the cultural norms evolve to reinforce female dependency and domesticity as natural. And because the culture views women as domestic dependents, it justifies continuing to restrict their access to high-paying jobs.
It's a perfect trap. Each part of the system reinforces the others.
And that answers the question of persistence. Why does a system that causes so much misery last for so long? Because it solves the problem of economic precarity. It's a terrible solution, according to Goldman, but within the design of 1911 capitalism, it is the only widely accessible solution for millions of people.
So that was 1911. Let's bring this forward to the present day, because obviously things have changed dramatically. Women can vote, women can be CEOs, we have no-fault divorce, we have widespread access to birth control. The world is different.
True. The specific laws have certainly changed. The formal constraints have been lifted. But the real question for a systems analysis is, do the underlying patterns persist, even in a different form?
Okay, let's test it. Let's start with economic dependency.
Well, today, we often have the dual income trap, where two incomes are required to maintain a middle-class lifestyle. But we also have the well-documented concept of the second shift.
Right. Women entered the workforce in huge numbers, but they still do the vast majority of the childcare and housework on top of their paid jobs.
So Goldman's observation that the home does not free women from wage slavery, but instead increases the task, still echoes very loudly. You have the wage job, and then you come home to the unpaid domestic job.
Okay, what about the legal benefits? Is marriage still an insurance pact?
The state still ties massive benefits directly to the marriage contract. Tax breaks, healthcare access, inheritance laws, Social Security benefits. The economic insurance model is still very much the chassis of the legal institution. For many people, the best way to get a good healthcare plan is still to get married.
That's absolutely true. It is still, at its core, a financial merger recognized and incentivized by the state.
And what about the cultural success script?
Yeah, that feels like it's still very much with us. We still tend to prioritize romantic partnership as the ultimate marker of a successful, complete adult life. If you're single at 40, people often ask, what's wrong, just like they did in 1911, even if the phrasing is a little more polite now.
There's still a social pressure, a sense that you haven't really made it until you've paired off.
And I think the biggest crisis in perception here, to bring it right back to our show's central theme, is how we interpret dissatisfaction within that structure.
Yes, this is key. When a marriage fails today, or when someone feels trapped or unhappy in a relationship, we almost exclusively treat it as a personal failure.
Did we try hard enough? Did we go to therapy? Did we communicate properly?
We internalize it completely. We blame ourselves. We blame our partner.
But looking at it through Goldman's lens, we might be forced to ask a different set of questions. Is this a structural outcome? Are we trying to merge economic necessity, legal benefits, and romantic ideals in a way that is just destined to create friction and failure?
Are we trying to make a business contract feel like a poetic union?
And when the poetry inevitably fades, the contract remains.
Yeah.
This has been a heavy deep dive. We've gone from insurance policies to fat and beasts to free motherhood. How do we wrap this up? What's the final takeaway?
I think the main thing is the shift in perspective that Goldman forces on us. She invites us to move from viewing marriage primarily as a sacred right
To viewing it as an economic arrangement.
She asks us to understand a concept like parasitism, or let's just say dependency, not as a character flaw in an individual, but as a predictable output of a system's design.
And most importantly, she highlights the fundamental, maybe even permanent hostility between the rigidity of law and the spontaneity of love.
Right.
Goldman ends her essay with this really powerful vision. She talks about standing on a mountain peak.
She does. It's her utopian vision. She envisions a future where men and women can finally meet as equals, strong and free, as she puts it. A place where love is the only bond that matters, and all the economic and legal coercion has been stripped away from intimacy.
It's a radical vision, maybe an impossible one. But it leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really provocative thought to end on.
The challenge she presents is to look at our own most intimate choices, to look at our relationships, past and present, and ask ourselves honestly, how much of this is love? And how much is economic pressure or social compliance or just fear of being alone?
It's a pretty scary question to ask yourself.
It is, but as we always say on this show, analyzing the incentives clarifies why things persist much more effectively than moral judgment ever can. Understanding why we do things is the first necessary step to any kind of real freedom.
Full credit for this analysis goes to Emma Goldman and her incredible essay, Marriage and Love. It's a text that still has teeth more than a century after it was written.
Absolutely. A must-read.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for listening.
Stay curious.